This content is brought to you by Uphold, which is a great platform that makes crypto investing easy. You can buy, sell, trade, and earn cryptocurrencies on Uphold. They have 10 plus million users, over 200 plus cryptocurrencies, and they're available in 150 countries. I personally use this platform since 2017. They're one of my go-to exchanges. They also offer equities and precious metals that you can invest in. If you'd like to learn more about Uphold, please visit the link in the description. Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto podcast, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is Kyle Schneps, who's the Director of Public Policy at Foundry. Kyle, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Tony. It's exciting to be here. I've been appreciating all you've done for the industry and for the community. So great to be here.
For sure. And I'm excited to speak with you because I've been following Foundry for a while. I've been talking about Bitcoin mining growth in the US, and you guys are really leading the charge. So I got a lot of questions for you, and it's exciting times. So before we get to that, though, tell us about yourself. Where you're from? Where'd you grow up?
Yeah, so originally from New York, went to school there, was born in Queens, and lived in Brooklyn and Long Island and Manhattan for school. So kind of that area was where I grew up, and but spent most of my adult life either abroad or in DC, usually because I have the federal government background.
Wow. Kyle, we didn't talk about specifics as to where you were born and all that. I grew up in Queens. I lived in Brooklyn. I went to high school in Manhattan. It's funny. We have very similar paths.
Yep, I was born in Bayside and went to high school in Long Island, and yeah, so we were right in the same area.
Oh yeah, I was in Richmond Hill. I lived in Forest Hills. I got into Bayside High School, but I ended up going to LaGuardia, the art school in Manhattan. So funny.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of our biggest champions for the crypto space in New York is actually an assemblyman from Queens named Clyde Vanell.
Oh wow. So tell us about what you did before working at Foundry.
So I actually started my federal government career as a White House fellow, and I worked between the White House Office of Management and Budget and National Security Council, that type of stuff. And so I really got a great snapshot or a bird's eye view, I should say, of how money can move through government from the top down. And it was certainly an interesting experience that we can talk about if you like, but
Sure.
It's certainly very interesting negotiating with agencies on how much money they should get and seeing why it's so difficult for government bloat to ever shrink down. It's hard to make any cuts in government. So that was a great experience. I then moved on, and I was a diplomat under the Obama administration, focusing on Guantanamo Bay. And so I was part of the special envoy's office that would travel and do negotiations and trying to get people out of Guantanamo Bay and relocate them, and all of the negotiations that happened there. And then, yeah, I had a career in national security after that. And eventually during COVID, I wanted to help operationally with maybe stuff that I've learned over the years. And so I came back to my home state of New York and worked in operations, setting up from the governor's office, setting up New York's vax clinics and trying to help organize people to get the vaccine that were choosing to do so.
Wow, man, you have a very strong pedigree in government. Pretty amazing. You were at the White House, and you mentioned budgeting with regards to these agencies and what funds they get. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I remember my first day. I had been working in East Africa previous to that, and my first day, back wearing a suit in the United States, my boss said to me, your portfolio is $13 billion.
Wow.
And so you're going to be managing and negotiating that. And I said, I don't exactly have a finance background. They're like, get used to it.
Wow.
But it's yeah, it functions, and that's one of the smaller portfolios, as you may imagine. So it's an interesting process how the presidential budget gets formulated, and then the negotiations with agencies, and then kicking that over to the congressional budget office, and having the appropriations through Congress. And so it's a lot to learn, and it's, there's an old joke of people who go to work at the White House Office of Management and Budget that you go in a Democrat and you leave a Republican because of how the money works. But I would say that now it's actually more of, I can imagine people going in no matter what their party and coming out a Bitcoiner.
I was just about to say that. Yeah, now it's like both parties are on the money printing machine, right? It's like, no, it's you come out a Bitcoiner.
Yeah, I think that's one of the distressing things in modern politics, is that the only people who ever want to stop government spending is the party that's not in power. Once they get in power, then they start spending again. So
so I'm going to throw a curveball question at you, because there's folks who say that the CIA, they know who Satoshi Nakamoto is. That could be a conspiracy theory or a joke or whatever it is. Is there any credibility to that?
In my background in working in government, I certainly would never come across that. I think that when folks are looking at the government and imagining conspiracies, I think most of the public servants and the regular people are just working really hard in the U.S. government. I think the suspicions come with a lot of the political appointees and how they try to influence agencies, no matter which party's in power. But I personally am not a big conspiracy theorist believer. I'm more of somebody who believes that you have a lot of different people in giant governments around the world who have multiple different objectives and intentions. And when they all conflict and conflate, you end up with some situation where either things are just blasé, or maybe things are anticlimactic. But I usually don't. My first thought after being in government for so long is never conspiracy, because there's a lot of incompetence in there. And I find it very hard to believe that there is an omniscience to it.
Yeah, for sure. I had to ask just because you got that background. So yeah. Tell us, what was your first encounter with Bitcoin, and what was your aha moment? When did it click for you?
So my first encounter with Bitcoin was actually in West Africa many years ago. I was really sick with malaria and had to go to a hospital. And one of the nurses, in speaking with her, said that she and her husband had been putting money into their earnings, part of it into Bitcoin, because they did not trust their own government.
Wow. And
so that kind of struck me, because Bitcoin had, maybe passed through my life at some point, but I never paid much attention. And when she told me that, it made me realize that there were a lot of purposes for something like Bitcoin that don't really get discussed in the mainstream media. The mainstream media tries to paint something like Bitcoin or crypto as crypto bro territory, people trying to get rich, everybody's a scam artist, that sort of thing. But there are some really, really important use cases, especially for anybody who spent time in the developing world. I spent, 5+ years of my adult life in sub-Saharan Africa, and in some of the most remote regions you can imagine. And there's a real need for this sort of decentralized monetary value. And So that was the first thing that raised a flag. Unfortunately, I was not a big investor when I learned that. I moved on with my life, like most people. There's a shot across the bow, and then you kind of forget about it. It wasn't until later, when I was in government and I started thinking about my own privacy and what that means, and especially when you have a security clearance and stuff like that, you start to feel like your own personal privacy and independence is waning away. And so I started thinking more about what it means to be independent and have a private life, beyond government. And in doing various readings, came across Bitcoin and things like Ethereum as well. But I kind of gravitated toward that decentralized Bitcoin ethic and that potential for anonymity and privacy.
Mm. And how did that lead to you eventually, finding your way to Foundry, which is a Bitcoin focused company, obviously mining and so forth? What was that journey like?
So when I had been in New York working from the governor's office and trying to set up, help operationally with combating COVID, whatever that may be, I eventually was looking for something else, and this job came out and was able to meet with folks from Foundry, and go through that interview process and meet with some folks from Digital Currency Group, and it just seemed like a great fit. And so I was able to finally figure out a way to. I was spending all my personal time, like most of us, right, reading about Bitcoin and reading about what this could be and what this means. But I figured this would be a great way to get paid for it at the same time. And it's been one of the best decisions I've made, because it's a really great company with a lot of hardworking, smart people. And yeah, we can get into more about Foundry if that's helpful.
Yeah, if you can, give us an overview of the company, kind of the history and the services. I mentioned Bitcoin mining, but you guys also have staking. So tell us about the mission of Foundry.
The primary mission of Foundry is to empower a decentralized economy by providing the infrastructure that's inherent in that decentralization. So that equates to a few different business streams. So one is through the first business stream, I think, that we're most known for within the industry is the Foundry USA Bitcoin mining pool. That has been the #1 pool in the world for over a year now, and it's been doing very well. And there's a lot of really hardworking people at Foundry working on that. We also have another business stream that's Foundry X, and that is the infrastructure that is machinery, right? Bitcoin mining machines, selling, trading, providing a marketplace for people to find the right deals for them. There's also Foundry staking services. There's a number of different tokens that Foundry focuses on. There is a primary focus on ETH, but there are others that can be found on the website. Foundry Deploy is a white glove setup service for any sort of Bitcoin mining facility that companies may need if they don't have the employees to rack machines, de-rack machines, fix machines. You can hire a trusted group of experts from Foundry to come in, work on that, so you don't have to give up your security to random temp workers, And then there's Foundry Academy, which is where people can come and sit in a room with experts and learn how to mine Bitcoin, how to work the machines, how to fix them, how to do everything. And then finally, Foundry Advisory Services works with energy companies, advising renewable energy companies how they can get into the space. And I think a lot of us in Bitcoin now, especially in the mining side of things, know that so many renewable energy companies are building in Bitcoin mining to their business models. And so we work with a wide variety of stakeholders that just want the expertise that Foundry can provide. So a lot of different business streams that all try to make a decentralized infrastructure for a new digital economy.
That's pretty amazing. I didn't even know about all the some of the services you mentioned there. That's awesome. I'm really curious as to what was the point at which Foundry jumped at the top of the list, in Bitcoin mining and across the globe. But obviously, you're also leading in the United States or in North America, I should say. Was it after the China ban and then miners started, moving to different parts of the world and some came to the United States? Did you get some of those miners as well?
Absolutely. I think that certainly played a role with the China ban on mining, with that migration to the US. A lot of people were, the Foundry pool had been growing because of, it has just really excellent software that a lot of companies tend to love. But that was a catalyst that pushed it over the top for sure. There's no denying that. Miners being able to come and operate in the United States and look for partners in the US that they can trust. And Foundry filled that void for a lot of companies that were operating all around the country.
So tell us about the locations of where your miners are located and maybe the equipment that you're using as well.
So Foundry operates in multiple different states. I mean, obviously our clients are everywhere in the US. Our particular operations, we do focus on New York. We recently acquired some new sites in South Dakota and Texas. And so we are trying to expand that, but also focusing on the other aspects of our business streams so that it's not just completely reliant on mining.
Sure.
But it is, there is a focus in New York. That is where Foundry is based, in Western New York. And that's kind of one of the interesting stories of somebody who works in public policy and talks to politicians all the time and elected officials, is Foundry's story in Rochester, New York, in Western New York, which is this area of New York that has been overlooked and underserved for nearly a century. And for the past half century has been experiencing workforce decline, and just a really challenging economic situation. And Foundry over the past 3 years has been able to go from 3 employees to 170.
Wow.
And so that is bringing, high paying Silicon Valley type jobs to an area that has been very much in need. And what I try to convey to policymakers is that this is what a decentralized infrastructure for an economy looks like, because you don't need to be in Silicon Valley. You don't need to be, in lower Manhattan. You can be in areas like Western New York or Kentucky or Georgia, any place that is more remote and has been overlooked in the past can now potentially be a hub. And that's kind of what Foundry is aiming to do, is make Western New York a kind of center of excellence for this industry.
Yeah, in addition to what you guys are doing, I've spoken to other Bitcoin miners as well down in Texas and so forth, and they're going, to your point, not to like the major cities. It's not like we're in Manhattan mining, but they're going to places where it's almost, should I say, like Detroit-like, right? With the industries have left, there's not much opportunities. Not that it's a bad place to live, but just opportunities. And you're setting up shop where there's cheap energy and creating jobs for the local economy, which is pretty incredible. And to your point, you've been trying to convey that to politicians about like, hey, we're boosting the economy, the local economy, we're creating jobs and so forth.
That's exactly right. I mean, I think that crypto mining has an incredible potential for reinvigorating forgotten inner city communities, industrial communities that have experienced that sort of Rust Belt history, and also rural areas,
Mm.
right? And this is one of the incredible things about Bitcoin mining is that you can do it anywhere. It's geographically location agnostic. As long as you can go to a place and have the space and have a basic internet connection and have, a form of energy that's somewhat reliable, it can be done anywhere. And so that's something that a lot of states should be looking at more seriously. And that's why I think states will actually be leading the public policy steps that are needed in the long run, and not the federal government.
Right. Yeah. And to your point, there hasn't been as much clarity or guidance from from the federal government, but to your point, states are moving ahead, like doing their thing, and a lot of miners are moving to different states where they're getting the help, whether it be tax breaks or just the friendliness. Like, okay, yeah, you can set up shop here. But recently, New York, they tried to ban Bitcoin mining. Tell us about that and what you guys have been doing there.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. For better or worse, states are going to be moving forward, and some, like Texas and other places, have embraced for better, and then there are some that are struggling to understand the potential here. And so on the worst side of the spectrum, we spent the past year and a half battling the Bitcoin mining ban that has taken place in New York. This is a 2-year ban on certain types of crypto mining. And, it was a very misguided policy. And we were up against a lot of disinformation and misinformation that was put out by the most powerful lobby in New York, which is the environmental lobby. And so we had an uphill battle, but we were able to have a few positives come from that, and that's we were able to unite the industry a bit, and we were able to identify why this industry is worthy of energy use. It's a strange thing for me to actually have to make that statement, like why would an industry have to demonstrate it's worthy? It should be equal access for all industries. But and we were able to get some lawmakers to understand the really important financial inclusion aspect of what Bitcoin can bring. According to the Kansas City Fed, according to Pew Research, according to the University of Chicago, we're looking at communities of color investing in cryptocurrencies a lot more than white populations. So Hispanic community, 21% compared to the white population of 13%. The Black Americans, 18% have responded that they invest in cryptocurrencies. And so it's important for lawmakers in New York to understand that many of their constituents are investors in this. And what Bitcoin miners are doing are securing the investments for around 40 million Americans. And that's something that really need to get across to policymakers in New York and DC, everywhere, that this is not as simple as they imagine. We can't just say energy bad, right? We have to have a bit more, a bit more thought and understand, well, what is the context of this energy use? All right, we're somewhere around video games in terms of global consumption, how much it uses. And that's less than most other industries. We're leading every other industry in terms of renewable energy usage. And so there's also this multitude of, we're incentivizing renewables, we're bringing a new investment class to people who have been historically disenfranchised by the legacy financial system. And so these are things that policymakers need to be understood. And there have been some really great support from folks in New York in this vein. So we are making progress. But it's, of course, being New York, it's going to take longer than most other most other states.
For sure. Yeah. As someone who grew up in New York, for sure.
Yeah.
Tell us about how much Bitcoin are you mining per day, if you have those stats, and the energy types as well. Is it you mentioned some renewable? Can you highlight some of the sources? I know it's scattered across the United States.
Yeah. So in terms of Foundry's particular mining, I'm not sure how much we are, mining ourselves. I know that our pool for the past month or so has been between somewhere around 30% of global hash rate.
Mm.
So it's been significantly growing, and it's really impressive. And there's a lot of talk about. Well, let me skip that for a second. With that, we are also, in terms of renewable energy, which is the second part of your question, our pool is somewhere around 70% using renewable energy from all of our members that we have. And so that's really great. And I think that in terms of Foundry itself, we are mostly operating with in front of the meter mining, and that's a mix of a lot of renewable energy that's in Western New York and other places. So our industry as a whole is just so far ahead of every other industry, but it's new and people don't understand it, and so politicians can get away with that attack. And strangely enough, as few people that do invest in cryptocurrency, it gets an incredibly outsized amount of press.
Yeah.
And so there is nothing more advantageous for a politician than making an attack on something that people don't understand and getting tons of press for it at the same time. So that's something we need to combat in the future by helping to educate journalists to not jump on the clickbait.
Mm. Are you able to tell us about the type of institutions, maybe you can name drop a bit if possible, who are participating in the mining pool? Are there any big financial institutions that once again that you can name drop?
Yeah, unfortunately I can't. We're not permitted to disclose our clients, whether it's on the mining or the staking side. But what I can say is that there's a wide variety of different clients, but they're all institutional, and they choose Foundry because it has the best software, and we've been around and reliable for a long time. So we're hoping that continues and that we can continue to get more and more people on board. But unfortunately, I can't get into who the clients are.
Okay, how about I ask it this way without giving names? Are any of them any of the Wall Street big institutions?
I don't know. I really don't know. Part of the thing with the public policy side of it is I don't get too enmeshed in business.
Gotcha.
So, but I wish I could give you an affirmative or a negative on that, but I truly don't even know. I think, as far as I know, most of our clients are in the United States, though, if not all. Yeah.
So Foundry, of course, is owned by Digital Currency Group, which owns a bunch of other companies, Grayscale, Genesis, and so forth, CoinDesk. Is the mining of the Bitcoin that is mined by Foundry, is that then sold to Grayscale to be part of like the GBT trust and so forth? What's the dynamic between those two companies?
So I can't get into our liquidation processes, but what I can say is that when it comes, so Foundry is a completely self-sufficient company under the DCG umbrella. So we operate completely self-sufficient and independent of our sister companies. And so there's not a reliance on the sister companies to take care of any aspect of our business. So if anything positive or negative happens in another company, it doesn't have a direct effect on Foundry's operations at all. And so whatever we've seen, if you're talking about Grayscale or Genesis, like you mentioned, we continue to fully function and operate as normal. But yeah, I can't get into our specific liquidation processes.
Yeah, I appreciate you providing that clarity there, that you guys are independent, even though you're under the parent company, if you want to call it that, of DCG.
Right.
So you're not affected by the stuff that's going on with Genesis and so forth.
100%. It's this is a company that we have completely different areas of operations, and we kind of stay in our lane and expand in the infrastructure side of the business. And so we have been operating normally, and we're self-sufficient, and so anything that happens within our business, that kind of in-house, and same for those companies usually.
We've had folks in the government, talk about Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. I think it was last year, if I'm not mistaken, Jerome Powell was asked a question, would there ever be a ban on crypto and Bitcoin and so forth? He said no. But there's always the naysayers, your Elizabeth Warrens and these people out there, right? Do you guys ever worry that, there might be a ban on Bitcoin in the US, and, would you have to pick up operations and go out the country? Once again, I don't think that's likely, but is that ever part of your risk category? Like, what if this happens?
I think we always have to consider that a risk, because as people who live and work in the United States, we want the US to be the leader in terms of Bitcoin, mining, crypto, whatever you're working on. We want the US to be a leader because the values and the principles that undergird Bitcoin are the same exact principles that are responsible, that are American values. The entire American Revolution, the founding of our nation, was about decentralizing monarchical power, right? And so I think that in monarchical power into a system of checks and balances. And whether or not that system has held up is arguable, but in terms of Bitcoin, I think the United States is the perfect place for this technology because of that background. That being said, we always have to consider the risk of a person in government who takes that view, like an Elizabeth Warren, right? Elizabeth Warren is so beyond the point of education that it's difficult. She's become what I think of as politically pot committed, like in poker. When you put too much in the middle, you just have to put there's no going back, because she's already taking such a strong political stance and used so much of her political capital to target this industry. It doesn't matter what she learns. We could be 100% renewable energy tomorrow. We could have everybody in the government telling her there's no risk here, and she would still be going after it, because that's what niche she found. Now, that being the case, there are lots of people who are much more open-minded, and luckily we do have that system of checks and balances, but we do have to, of course, stay active in public policy to make sure that those people that are able to be swayed by folks like Elizabeth Warren are educated and are able to push back with facts and data that our industry can provide. And so there's a lot of folks working in DC right now, myself included, who are trying to provide that education.
For sure. Yeah. You made a great point that she's taken that stance along with, other skeptics. And it's even if facts and information is presented that shows that she's wrong, she still won't leave that position. I hate that about politics. The dynamics, like, yeah, just be reasonable, but what can I say?
Exactly. And luckily the people who have gone so far on an issue are usually few and far between. And we're able to focus on talking to the people who are reasonable. And remember, time and technology are on our side.
Yes.
This is a generational shift. the septuagenarians and octogenarians in Congress, the Elizabeth Warrens, right? They don't get this technology, and they never really will. But you know what? Their children or their grandchildren are. And so as the generational shift happens, people will be much more familiar with the technology. They will have grown up with it. It won't be as scary. And I think there will be a lot of growth. And technology always wins in the end anyway. It's just going to take time. It's just going to take time.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it throughout history, right? The candle makers didn't like electricity and the light bulbs. The horse and buggy people didn't like cars, right? I remember some folks screenshotting some articles and different types of propaganda items, artwork, and so forth from those days. And it's so funny, right? They're like, this is the electricity, the wires are going to kill people, and all kinds of things, right? They put out all these things, but you can't stop progress and disruptive technology. It as much as you want to fight it, it's going to beat you.
100%.
So let's talk about Bitcoin as a whole. We saw El Salvador make Bitcoin a legal tender. Are you expecting to see other countries make Bitcoin a legal tender? And could central banks hold Bitcoin like they do gold as a reserve?
In terms of other countries, I could envision that happening the next few years. I think there's a lot of countries waiting to see what happens in El Salvador. They're waiting to see what happens there. They're waiting to see what happens in Central African Republic, right? There are a lot of entities out there from the legacy financial system and from the neo-colonialist system, organizations like the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, who have a lot vested in the debt of these countries.
Yeah.
And so, Alex Gladstein had wrote about this recently and gave a great iterative update of an old book called Confessions of an Economic Hitman from many years ago. And the general premise behind these writers is that they're really telling about neocolonialism and how these organizations exploit debt in smaller countries in order to exercise political influence on the global stage. And that is I think the major headwind that smaller nations who would greatly benefit from adopting Bitcoin, that's the headwind that they are challenged with overcoming. And so I think if El Salvador is able to be successful and have some real positives they can show, objective positives, I think there could be some more adoption from countries in the near term. In terms of central banks, that's a tough question. When I think of central banks, I think that they are some of the central banks, larger ones, their main purpose is to manipulate currency, right? Their main purpose is to manipulate in order to get the desired results that are the results that are desired. And so I wonder what they would actually want to take on that they cannot manipulate. If they are not able to manipulate to get the inflation or the unemployment data that they want, which is their major two goals, right? I'm not sure, but I think that eventually Bitcoin will have to overtake gold as some sort of reserve, even though we no longer follow the gold standard. It seems to be going that way. And I don't know anybody really under the age of 50 who thinks that like gold has much utility.
Yeah.
When you look at it, it's like, maybe 2% of it goes to making, stuff for your teeth and jewelry and electronics, but most of it is just in reserve, right? So I think that most people of our generation and younger are much more comfortable with a digital form of value.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, speaking for myself as a millennial, I don't hold any gold, but I have stocks. I have crypto, and things like that. But gold never appealed to me, and especially in a digital age. So let's talk about crypto regulations. We touched a little bit on it. A lot of folks are looking at the SEC and the CFTC to try to see when are we going to get clarity. When are we going to get a Bitcoin spot ETF versus the paper ETF, futures ETF that's out there in the market, and just regulations overall for the market. What are your thoughts on that? And could this be the year? Could this be the year Congress forces the SEC and the CFTC to take action?
Certainly, I think most rational people are agreed that regulation is needed to some degree just to get us over this hump of random enforcement, right? And to also legitimize the industry for investors. In terms of will it happen this year in the legislature, in the federal government, I'm not so sure because the Republicans now have control of the House. And when you have a Republican-controlled House, a Democrat Senate, things tend to stalemate, which is not always a bad thing. When one party has control of all the houses, whether it's Republican or Democrat, you tend to push things a little too far one way or the other. Some stalemate is good. That being said, there are a lot of politicians upset about the FTX Sam Bankman-Fried thing, and they are taking it personally because they took money and it has made them look not so great.
Yeah.
And so, there may be a motivation there, but if anything happens, it will be on the back of that debacle. And so what we have to do yet again is rebuild the credibility that situation, that collapse, that fraud, it erased a lot of people's work. A lot of people work in DC had everything go up in flames just from that one thing. And so it's about building back trust, providing accurate data, showing that you're still a resource. And just like the folks building technology during crypto winter are head down building, it's the same thing for public policy. Now's the time when we can continue to build our relationships. When maybe the price isn't going crazy and things like that. So I think that the stalemate that may develop may prevent the type of regulation we're looking for. But I hope that they're able to have some good discussions at least, and that we're able to convince more people to see the opportunities this technology provides instead of focusing on the same old tired propaganda about energy and criminality.
Yeah, for sure. I felt like we were making a lot of progress until the FTX thing. There was the Lummis Gillibrand bill, so you had bipartisan. There was other bipartisan groups as well. Just both sides of the aisles working together, and then this FTX thing happened, and I think everybody's just like, "Oh my god!" Like,
yeah. Perhaps the one saving grace here is that politicians are so used to the financial crimes of Wall Street, right? A lot of politicians have been around for years, and they have been through so many multi-billion-dollar fines of Wall Street banks that they can see criminality for what it is. And so I think there are the really rational-minded policymakers are looking at this and saying, look, this was an old-fashioned crime in new clothes. And it doesn't matter what it is, this is always going to happen. We don't want to get rid of the stock market because of the 2008 financial collapse. We also don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to digital assets.
For sure. Tough question for you. And I'm not necessarily looking for price predictions, but rather adoption obviously there's Bitcoin, but then there's other cryptocurrencies and digital assets, and just blockchain will be throughout the economy, whether it be healthcare, finance, whatever it may be. Where do you see the crypto industry and market in 5 years?
In 5 years, I see it having made a lot of progress. I see it as having been adopted by a lot more people. I see, 5 years will bring some change in leadership in government. That most young leaders, whether it's Richie Torres in New York, Cory Booker, Rokanen, like these younger leaders are open-minded and looking at this technology for what it can be in the future, and not getting held up with some of the collapses that happen with every new industry. So I think we have the ability for more adoption and proper regulation within the next 5 years. And that being said, I certainly see another bull market. It's bound to happen. It can't be bear market forever. Yeah. And when that happens, I think the industry is going to be a lot smarter. We were new to politics. We were new to public policy. And when an industry feels under threat, there's this impetus to like, okay, well, let's pay the people who say they can make it go away. Let's do this, let's do that. People who aren't experts in the technology, but maybe have relationships in Washington or whatever. I think there's going to be a lot more selective work with policymakers. It's not going to be the FTX model of throwing money at everybody, but it's going to be really working with the people. And so when there is that bull market and everybody wants some of the successful industry, I think we're going to be able to pick and choose how we distribute money to candidates, how we can put our own people in positions of power so that we get away from this cycle of arguing amongst ourselves in the dark recesses of Twitter. And hopefully we can get to a position of arguing amongst ourselves in the halls of power.
Well said. Final question here before we hit the wrap-up questions. CBDCs are coming. So the governments, the central banks are taking the blockchain, tokenizing fiat. I'm sure they're going to continue the same status quo. It'll probably make it easier for them to mint or print, or however you want to call it. My big concern has always been privacy. Will it continue the U.S. Constitution, right to privacy? And I know that's a big debate that's happening. What are your thoughts, and are you worried about the privacy?
I'm very concerned about it. I think that CBDCs represent an existential threat to the foundation of the values of the country. I'm also an advisor to the Bitcoin Today Coalition, and within the Bitcoin Today Coalition, myself and some friends formed the BTC Vets, which is a group of veterans from the military, from the intelligence community, veterans of first responders across the country, whether it's firefighters, police officers. We have folks who are former diplomats, all people who believe that it's important for Bitcoin to be adopted within the United States, and also believe in the pitfalls that CBDCs represent. And that is one of our missions, is to educate folks on what exactly the threats are from CBDCs, how it is something that is being used by China to enhance their surveillance state, and I would even argue to complete their surveillance state.
Yeah.
And that digital yuan represents a threat not only to the principles of Bitcoin, but I would even argue it makes a threat to the US dollar in general. And so policymakers really need to view a CBDC as something that is a threat that needs to be, dealt with. and coming up with our own is not fixing anything, because you're having the same old problems in a just making it more digital.
Yeah.
And so something like Bitcoin needs to be evaluated in terms of how we can use it to tap into an international system that already exists, an international network, to oppose the Chinese digital yuan, to oppose the concept of the, I would say, the Belt and Road Initiative that China's been building around the world. We already have a digital Belt and Road Initiative. It's Bitcoin. It is a decentralized network around the world that it is free to tap into for any Western democratized government.
Mm. I got some wrap-up questions here for you. First,
Sure.
if you could create your own metaverse, what would the theme be?
I think so. This is a tough question. If I was creating my own metaverse, it would be something that, when I think of metaverse, I think of a way to make my personality or me more digital in the, in the connected world of the internet, right? And so I would imagine something that would be interesting to me would be like an international digital embassy system, but not controlled by governments. Something where I can go into a public square that's set up within any country my avatar could go into, let's say, and have conversations and exchange ideas, information, and value in a decentralized way that's not controlled. And that would have to be something that is run through a decentralized satellite system, if Elon Musk decides to donate his Starlink. But that would be the main function of it, I think, would be to be able to go to other places, make that visitation more real, meet other people, and transact with them, whether it be with information or value or ideas, in a more interpersonal way than currently exists through a Zoom call.
Yeah. All right. That would be pretty amazing. I got some rapid fire questions here for you. Favorite food?
Anything in Italy or Turkey.
Favorite musician or band?
Ella Fitzgerald and Bob Dylan.
Favorite movie?
Chinatown.
Favorite book?
I'd go Crime and Punishment.
And
that's a hard one, though. Yeah. I'm a big reader, so, but I have to say Raskolnikov is a great character.
For sure. And when you're not working at Foundry, what are you doing for fun as a hobby?
Well, I have a 9-month-old daughter, and so you can tell I liked Ella Fitzgerald. My daughter's name is Ella. But so that takes up a lot of my time. But when I'm not doing that, I'm probably playing guitar or watching some football and hanging out with family.
Oh, that's awesome, man. We have a lot in common, man, because I play guitar too. And
well, we'll get together.
Yeah.
We'll do another one in person, and we can have a jam session afterwards, and I'll bring the whiskey or the gin, whatever you prefer.
For sure, man. For sure. Kyle, pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Tony. Appreciate everything you do, and let's do it again.